Welcome back to Straight Talk with Tracey. Thank you for joining me. I have a really exciting show today. I'm welcoming Jay Taylor, who is a licensed clinical social worker and a colleague of mine from Silver Hill Hospital, and also a trainer for the organization called A Call to Men. So we're going to be talking, Jay, to you today. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. Tell me about your shirt.
Yeah, so this shirt was actually a part of a training that I was conducting in New York City with, I want to say it was around 20 or so educators from around the United States. And what we were doing is we were preparing them to teach a 9-week healthy masculinity curriculum to their students. And this particular shirt came from a creative arts middle school, where one of the teachers, while we were teaching them about each lesson and going through how to develop this curriculum with their students, there's a theme coming up for him about creativity for his students because it's a creative arts school. And so out of nowhere, he just raised his hand and said, "Hey, I've got an idea at the end of the 9 weeks. Why don't we all reward them with a shirt?" We said, "That sounds great. What do you want to put on?" He says, "Well, I've already designed it right in the middle of the training." So he threw it up on the screen, and there's probably 40 people in the room, and they all unanimously agreed we should print those right away. So all the students who participated in this program, which was high schools and middle schools all across the United States, a lot of the kids got these shirts. So it was an exciting thing. And then as I traveled to go to the schools that I was overseeing, I wore the shirt too, and we're all a part of something pretty cool.
I love it. And I love the fact the organization is called A Call to Men, which we're going to talk about. But the fact that you are teaching and training young men, as young as middle school, 12, 13, preteen, it's fabulous. So tell us what A Call to Men's mission is.
Sure. So A Call to Men's mission is very simple. It's to create a world where men and boys are loving and respectful, and women are valued and safe.
You might want to say that again. That's
to create a world where men and boys are loving and respectful, and women and girls are valued and safe.
Nirvana.
It's a utopia, yes.
Yes.
But I believe it's within reach if we put in the work.
So how did the organization start?
So it's been around for 20 plus years. It started with a couple of individuals, Tony Porter and Ted Bunch. They were both working in domestic violence intervention work and substance abuse treatment. And what ended up happening is they were beginning to realize that as long as they were always addressing domestic violence after the fact, that it was going to continue. And at a certain point, what Ted and Tony did is they put their heads together and they said, we realize that there's a culture, or there's a socialization in manhood that creates the space for this violence to continue to occur. And the work they were doing was more in intervention, and they decided to swim upstream to prevention. Mm-hmm. And that's really where A Call to Men blossomed and has grown since. So it's been around for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. We've have contracts and worked with the National Football Association, the NBA, the NHL, the MLB, the United States military, and countless colleges and universities across the United States, as well as a lot of high schools, even elementary schools. Because we believe that socialization around masculinity and manhood, especially the ways we're socialized that creates a space for violence to occur, starts really young. Mm-hmm. So we can talk with anybody about it. And one of our mission, one of our goals in our trainings is not just to intervene with young kids, but to also talk to adults, men of influence, men in positions of power who have influence to speak to these issues, whether it's just their son or their little brother or their nephew, or they're the CEO of a large company. They have a platform to speak to this issue, and when they start to get involved, we begin to re-socialize everyone, adults and men and boys alike.
So the socialization or the social culture that allows the violence to continue, that is somewhat condoned because men are men, you call that the man box.
Yeah, so I'll say this. So what we have at A Call to Men is we've kind of formulated some ideas around how it is that men are socialized to understand women in general. And the 3 pillars that create a space for violence to exist and occur are seeing women as having less value, seeing women as sexual objects, and seeing women as the property of men. And it's within that space that violence can occur. Now, when it comes to the man box, the concept that A Call to Men has come up with, the man box is a little different. It's a figurative box that we are sort of imprisoned by as men, so to speak. They're sort of shackles, these invisible shackles that always tell us the same messages, whether they're subtle and unconscious, or whether they're overt in our homes growing up or in media messages. And those messages are quite simple. They're always the same. Never be vulnerable, never be weak, don't show sadness, don't show fear, always be strong, always be dominant, see women as objects, and most importantly, always be powerful, right? And when we're constantly living in that space, it shrinks our ability to feel and express a full range of human emotion, and it limits us from really connecting with our own humanity. So this box isn't working for anyone.
Right, neither men nor women. And so I read about some relatively staggering statistics that this man box, this suppression of a natural emotion, I mean, we all have innately this part of our brain that allows us to feel, right, and gives us information that we need in order to survive in our world. So all the suppression of that emotion has some physical and mental health impact.
Yes, there are unquestionable consequences to
Right,
that.
so talk to those.
Yeah, so what we know from research and from I believe the I forget, the CDCA, I believe, says that the suicide rates, the completion rates for men is 4 times of that of women. And we have to assume that part of that is because men are socialized in a context of constant aggression and violence. And so then when mental health issues begin to mount, substance abuse begins to creep in, men turn to the one thing that we know, which is violence. And we then turn that violence onto ourselves and our own bodies, right? And so the ways that men attempt suicide, the ways that men harm themselves tend to be more violent than women would, because we're socialized to understand our lives and our identities through a lens of aggression.
Right.
And so it has unquestionable impact on our mental health
Right.
and our recovery rates as well.
And physical health as well?
Absolutely, yeah. We see men with higher incidence of migraine headaches, of tension, of stress issues, because we're holding everything in and we're not allowed to show vulnerability. I think the one emotion that men are allowed to have is anger.
Yes.
That's the one socialized emotion that I'm allowed to express. The interesting thing about anger is, though, something that you helped teach me as well, is that anger is often a secondary emotion. Not always, but often a secondary emotion. And what's behind that are 2 emotions that we're not allowed to express as men,
Right.
which is fear and hurt.
Sadness.
Sadness. We're not allowed to show those.
That's right. Yeah.
So if we're not allowed to show those, what are we allowed to show? Anger.
Right.
And that anger then, at a certain point, when we're in a really, really dark place, gets directed right back into ourselves.
Right.
And that's with pills, with alcohol, self-harm,
Right.
you name it.
Right. And men are less likely to seek help for mental health issues.
Oh, one of the pillars of the man box is don't ask for help. I'm
Right.
sorry I didn't mention that earlier.
Yeah.
You could almost frame the walls of the man box to a degree with don't ask for help.
Right.
And there's a cycle of consequences that occurs when men don't ask for help, right? They feel a sense of maybe weakness or vulnerability, but don't ask for help, right? And then they start to get angry, and then they lash out, and they often turn to violence against others. Then that gets them, and they're in that moment, they're not going to ask for help.
Right.
Then they're going to get caught into a system of being penalized, whether that's with the school or at home or a judicial system. Then they're in that space, they don't ask for help.
Right.
Then they get sent into a prison system or some kind of penitentiary, and while they're there, sure as heck don't ask for help.
Right.
And it can just lead to this constant cycle of consequences. Now, whether it leads to prison or not may be a more extreme example, but for a lot of men, they end up just getting cut off from themselves and from the other people in their lives that they care about. So there's always consequences to being emotionally and mentally shut down.
Right, right. And this culture of violence in men does not discriminate socioeconomically.
No.
Right, so we are surrounded in every community by this culture of violence.
Yes, all men across the world are socialized generally in similar ways. We may have nuances for the ways that we understand our identities based on race and class and culture and geographic location. That all informs parts of our identity, but the underlying ways that men are taught to be in this world, everywhere you go for the most part, are generally the same. And though that's the socialization that A Call to Men has dedicated its entire existence to addressing.
So how do you combat well, this is how men are. This is how we were raised. There's not much we can do about it. And men have to be aggressive in order to survive in a very competitive and aggressive world. How do you combat that? How do you work against that? Men can be men and succeed and not be stuck in the man box.
Sure, I'll say two things to that. First, I would say that we hear all the time, oh, boys will be boys, right? What that's doing is that's giving men a pass to act and behave in certain ways that are problematic for themselves and for others around them, right? And that's part of that socialization. We're taught that this is just how men are. We're almost taught that that's how they are deep down biologically, that we weren't socialized that way. So we're trying to bring to light that this is a socialization process and that we can be re-socialized, right? And the other thing that I want to say about aggression, because we work with a lot of sports and athletic teams. I just flew back from Los Angeles recently working with a Major League Soccer team. There's a place in life for aggression, and it functions and it works and it's great. You need it on the field if you're going to succeed and win. You may need it in other spaces in life to help get you through tough times, but there is a place and a space for it that it works and it functions, and it can't translate when you go home to see your wife.
Right.
It can't translate when you start talking to your son who's about to get an injection. He's 5 years old from the doctor and he's scared. Don't tell him to man up.
Right.
That's the kinds of things that we would be saying. That's the way we've been socialized. But what you're really saying in there is, if you're manning up, that means that you're immediately teaching him that he needs to be strong, not be vulnerable, but it also sends a message about what a woman is.
Right.
At the same time.
Woman down.
Woman down, man up.
Right.
Literally.
Yes.
And so what we do is we try to address all of those things, the ways that the subtle things we say. You throw like a girl, man up, boys will be boys. These are all socialized things. I can go to a group of 300 college students. I've done this. I stood in front of them and I said, I want you guys to complete this sentence. You throw like a, and then everybody, girl. And then I say, what? How did you know that? How'd you know I was going to say girl?
Right.
That's socialization.
Right.
We all know these subtle things in life that we're taught. And it's time that we start challenging them, because this isn't working for anybody.
Right. So what about the men that say, yeah, I get it. I hear what you're saying. I'm not like that. With my family, I'm quite tender. I'm way okay if my son comes to me and wants to play with dolls, or wants to go into a creative field, for instance. Whatever. That's not me. It's not my problem.
Right.
I hear what you're saying, but it's not me. I'm okay.
Yeah. And I'll have to be honest with you, that was me for a long time. I was that, I think that that's a wonderful opportunity to validate that their experience is a little bit different and they're trying to live differently and trying to be more open to different ideas and expand their own identity and their relationships. But at the same time, it's also a bit of an excuse to say that I'm not part of what's going on out there, right? We hear terms that get tossed around a lot, like toxic masculinity. And what happens with that term is that oftentimes men hear, well, that there's a portion of the population that's toxic, that there's a form of masculinity that's toxic, and then there's all the other masculinity that's not. And they'll group themselves with that and then wash their hands clean. But we're all a part of it. All men, as we discussed earlier, are socialized to believe that women have less value, believe that women are sexual objects and the property of men. We get these messages in school, at our homes, in media sources and outlets all the time, and we're constantly being fed these same messages over and over again. And if you've chosen to make a little bit of a different choice, I commend you for that. But the journey's not over there. It's time to start to really think critically about all the messages that we're receiving about our own identities as men, and the ways that our sons and our boys are receiving their messages as well about men, and how they view women then as well, because we're all a part of it. And I would say that it's something as simple as laughing at a sexist joke, and participating in that process that is a part of this socialization that we're all connected to. And as men who want to choose to really be different, we have to choose to separate those moments and be critically aware of when they're occurring, and then make a choice to speak in that moment, right? Because it can become really easy to stay silent. The truth is that most men are well-intended. Most men don't commit violence. They don't commit sexual harassment. They don't rape. Most men are not violent. But most men are silent about the violence that continues to persist and occur. And it's that silence that a call to men is trying to stop and start to give men a voice to speak to this issue. But that can be really hard.
Very
I'll admit,
hard.
I work for them, and it's hard for me sometimes. And I can give you stories of that if you'd like. But
Yeah.
it can be tough, but that's really our goal, is to give men a voice to speak to these issues. When I hear a sexist joke, I gotta say something about it.
Right.
You know, you have to be careful, but say something.
We're going to talk about very practical ways that men can begin to address this in their own lives. I wanted to, before we go to break, talk about the media and how this message is spread in the media. You've showed me some advertisements that we've become immune to, that the message. Because I think a lot of people think about pornography, and certainly pornography is on the rise because of access to the internet.
Digital media.
Younger and younger and younger boys are looking at pornography, which is of course affecting their view of what women are. I read an article recently from the New York Times, I believe, about how this dynamic is creating this unrealistic expectation for young boys about what a girl will do with them. And so the normal developmental sexuality is being accelerated because of their viewing of images that are inappropriate for their age. But it's not just those very graphic representations of the male-female hierarchy. It's very subtle messages like a beer commercial. Right?
Absolutely. The little things we see. I could watch the Super Bowl,
Right.
and I can pick out over and over.
Your mind must be like crazy when you're watching the Super Bowl.
Well, and there's just tiny messages that we get here and there that so often, because we're so bombarded by them as men, and they work to sell things, right? They do function to work, and so we just we push them away.
Right. Can you give one example from?
Sure. So for instance, there may be a commercial where this is a Super Bowl ad I can think of, where there's two women standing next to each other, and they are twins, both of which have large breasts, right? And the tagline at the bottom says, "Here's for going for two." Now imagine you have a 9-year-old nephew sitting next to you, or your son, and he turns to you and says, "What are they talking about?" I've always been socialized as a man to just kind of laugh at that, giggle. I know what they're talking about,
Sure.
right? But I'm not going to tell him, "Oh, they're talking about football. They're just talking about football."
Right.
Well, what we want to do at a call to men is stop that conversation right there, help you be critically aware of what it is they're talking about, the kind of messages that's being touted, and then when your 9-year-old nephew asks you, "What are they talking about?" you'll turn to him and you'll say, "It's talking about their breasts." Well, why would they be talking about their breasts?
Ew, that's
Well, because
gross.
this is advertising, and it works on men, and they try to make money by using women's bodies as objects. And this is the way that the world works. That simple conversation, I believe, is a revolution in our society. And that's what we're searching for. That's what we're trying to get. So these little messages that we're getting all the time, it's about us as men, adult men, being critically aware of it, and then learning to have a voice to speak to it.
Right.
And I believe we can. It's not that hard if we just take a minute to think about it.
Right.
And accept that maybe from time to time, we've also been a part of it too. I'm willing to accept that I am a part of the process that has created this world. I have laughed at sexist jokes. I have objectified women. I've been a part of it. I'm just trying these days to do things a little bit differently. And I still slip and fall. I still mess up because it's so deeply ingrained in my socialization. But I'm trying to do things differently. And I think that more men would be absolutely happy to do that if we can just open their eyes to the way things operate a little bit more.
Right. So when we come back, we're going to talk more practically about what men can do and about your trainings and how that is helping to shape a new way of looking
I'd
at
love to
things.
talk about that. Thank you.
We'll be back.
For 1 in 4 Americans, mental illness hits close to home. And since 1931, Silver Hill Hospital has also been close to home. For individuals and families facing the challenges of mental illness, Silver Hill offers a highly trained, compassionate staff that provides state-of-the-art care in a beautiful and private setting. If mental health issues hit close to home, remember, there's a world-class psychiatric hospital right in the neighborhood.
Welcome back to Straight Talk with Tracey. I'm joined today by Jay Taylor, who is a licensed clinical social worker at Silver Hill Hospital, but also, and perhaps more importantly today, he is a representative, a trainer for an organization called A Call to Men. Thank you so much again for being with me here today. I've had the distinct advantage of talking to you over multiple dinners about your work with A Call to Men, and it's just fascinating. So I want to thank you for being available to us as a resource for this really, really important message. So we're going to talk now about how men that can't perhaps access one of your trainings could begin to make some really practical yet vital changes in their own way of being, way of talking, way of interacting with women that could make some changes. So you've been gracious enough to condense what is a very intense 9-week seminar that you give to high school kids and college kids into some bullet points that we can share. So thank you for doing that. And the first one, so the principles of healthy and respectful manhood. I want you to say again the mission statement because I think it's so important.
Sure. So the mission statement is quite simple, but big. It's to create a world where men and boys are loving and respectful, and women and girls are valued and safe.
Right. So that term respect, I work a lot, as you know, with adolescents, and their parents will say to them, be respectful. And kids don't often know what that means, right? So that's a sort of a vague term for a lot of people, and it varies from family to family based on your family value system, whatever culture you grew up in. Are there some basic ways that men can be respectful to women that is cross-cultural, cross-socioeconomics, just basic humanity respect?
Absolutely. I may sound like a bit of a broken record in answering this question, but I really believe this is the crux of it all, is that if you can begin to understand and believe in your heart that women have equal value to the lives and experiences of men, that is the foundation of it all. Understanding that women's lives, their experiences are just as important, are just as valuable to yourself and to the world as the experiences, the lived experiences of men, that's the foundation of respect. Also, because we've been socialized to see women as objects, and because we've been socialized to see them as property, we have to remove ourselves from that thought process as well. And when we recognize and see maybe a little bit of objectification coming up in ourselves, or a little bit of women as property coming up, we have to start to challenge that within ourselves. And if you can challenge those messages, respect will come naturally. I think what most people are saying when they say respect me, or parents say to their children, I want respect, what they're saying is I want you to value what I have to say. I want you to understand and hear what it is that I'm trying to express. And oftentimes, because men have generally been valued to see women as having a little less value in our society, they won't listen to the experiences of women as easily or as quickly, or they'll maybe scoff it off a little bit quicker. And so just recognizing that what she has to say in this moment, or what she's experiencing and living in this moment, is just as valuable as my own, I think respect comes naturally after that.
So listening and valuing. Number one bullet for principles of healthy and respectful manhood: embrace and express a full range of emotion. Oh my goodness. How do we get people, humanity, to do this, but most importantly, men?
Yeah, and I think as a society in general, oftentimes we're taught not to show weakness because we equate weakness with less than, right? And so specifically when we're working with men and boys, what we're trying to show them, what we're trying to be able to express to them, is that a little bit of vulnerability is actually a strength, because you're going to be able to ask for help when you need it. You're going to be more successful academically, socially, vocationally, when you're able to say, I can't do it right now. I'm not feeling strong in this moment. That's being honest with yourself. That's showing that you can be vulnerable, and that you can then ask for help. And when we do that, we find a greater connection to other people, and we create more community. And I think when that process occurs, men are then more willing to see that these trappings of the man box aren't working for us. They're keeping us limited. They're holding us back as well.
Making us sick.
Yeah, they're making us sick. They're making us angry. They're hurting our relationships. They're hurting ourselves. That we can't sleep. We can't eat. We have more stress. We have more anxiety. We have more substance use. All of those things are part of locking ourselves in. And so I think what's tough is the message that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to not be strong and powerful and dominant all the time. It's okay sometimes, but you don't have to be every minute of every day. And when you do that, there is a sigh of relief that you can let out that's as freeing as breaking the chains of handcuffs. It's quite amazing, and I can speak to that in my own life.
So it's the ability to tolerate the discomfort of being vulnerable, right? So building up that tolerance, right? We talk about this with all of our clients that we work with that are struggling with their emotional experience. But to be able to say, this is uncomfortable, and I can manage it. And I can manage it in an effective and healthy way. And this is part of being a human being. It doesn't make me weak, it makes me human. To acknowledge that really, really vital part of ourselves that is our emotional experience.
Yeah, I think that when we recognize that emotional part of our experience, we get closer to our own authenticity. But in order to get to authenticity, you sometimes have to walk through the door of vulnerability. And for men, specifically, the way we've been socialized, we're taught to never even look down that hallway, let alone get close to that door. Right? And so we're trying to say it's okay to walk down that hall, it's okay to embrace that fear and to show you're human. And in fact, when you do that, you might find a little bit more of your own authenticity and your own humanity in that process.
Yeah, and be able to connect, as you said.
Absolutely.
Don't conform to the pressure to always be fearless and in control.
Yeah.
The need for control.
Yeah, the need for control is universal, I think. Men, women, this is not a uniquely male problem. We also, I want to say this because I think we've been speaking in a lot of binaries about men and women, and I think that there's a spectrum of gender that should be addressed in this process as well. And at A Call to Men, we try to do that as much as we can because we recognize that this is an issue that everybody experiences, not just uniquely men or uniquely women or folks who don't identify on the binary as well. This need to be in control is just human, right? And when we're constantly seeking control, there are so many things that we cannot control. And so it makes us feel like we're losing our minds. And when you finally relinquish a little bit of that control in a moment, you relieve yourself of that stress, you relieve your relationships of the pain that goes along with constantly needing to control, and you feel a certain sense of relief from that. It sure as heck isn't easy to get there. And this is a little, once we get into this part of the process, this is a little bit deeper into our trainings that we would do. This wouldn't be something that we would tackle, in a 2 or 3 hour training. This would be something we would do if we were engaging with somebody for a long period of time. Because you really have to first get someone to the space where they recognize that it's okay to not be in control.
Anecdotally, do you have a vignette, a story about how somebody gave up, was able to make that shift, that paradigm shift in their life, and to give up a little bit of control, and what that might look like?
It was a tearful day. I was at a training. It was a 2-day, what we call an institute, is what we do at A Call to Men. It was in New York City, and 2-day institutes typically consist of 2 separate 7 to 8 hour days of intensive trainings where we talk. We sort of introduce the ideas and concepts of A Call to Men, but then we dive into the intersections of race and class and gender and how all of that plays into our identities as individuals, our collective socialization, and how we want to start making shifts and changes in the world to make this a safer place for all. And so during one of these institutes, there was a gentleman in the room who I would say he was around 65 years old, in that general range, and he didn't speak much at all during the training. He kept to himself, and that's common, and we don't push anybody to speak if they don't feel that they're ready to or they can. And he came up to us after the training, to the whole team, and he said, "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm going to be okay."
Wow. Holy I just got goosebumps.
I
Holy
cried.
mackerel.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was like watching a 65-year-old be born again.
That's right. So he had walked through his life thinking, I'm not going to be okay. So imagine the stress that that causes when you are constantly having that fear response to life, because you're not going to be okay.
Yeah, your cortisol levels shoot up.
There's danger everywhere.
Yeah.
Wow.
You're in constant alert mode.
Right.
Yep.
Hypervigilance.
Survival.
Yeah. And he's a man, so he's got all that burden as well.
Right, and he's not going to ask for help. Forget that.
No.
He said he'd never shown his wife any vulnerability. He'd never let his kids see him cry. And he said one of the things he really wanted to do, I'll never forget this, and I still think about him to this day. I wonder if he's done it yet, if the opportunity's come, and I assume it has, for him to cry in front of his daughter. He didn't even want to cry in front of his daughter, let alone a son.
Right.
Right, because God forbid a man cries in front of his son. But in this case, he wouldn't even cry in front of his daughter. So.
Wow. Life-changing. Next bullet says, value a woman's life, treat all people equally. It is always startling to me in this day and age that we have to discuss this, but I guess we do. And we know that from all of the media attention to Me Too and Time's Up, and I'd like to include in that a call to men.
Yes.
Equality, treat all people equally.
Yeah. So it's hard for men and boys to treat women with equality. And for this reason, because we've been taught not to take an interest in the lived experiences of women outside of sexual conquest. So if you don't mind, I'll give you a little example,
Yeah,
and you can
please.
answer with me. So if a young man is standing outside, let's say he's around 9 or 10 years old, I keep going to 9 or 10 because it's kind of that fertile ground where you're learning about identity and you haven't really explored sexuality yet, those things. So he's about 9 or 10 years old, 11 maybe, and he's outside with 4 girls playing.
Right.
He's maybe in the front yard playing whatever they're playing. It's him and 4 girls. And dad comes home from work, pulls in the driveway.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying your dad, because maybe your dad's trying things a little differently, but I'm saying just dads in general. The son then leaves his friends, his four female friends, and runs inside. What question might dad ask him?
About that experience?
Yeah, about him
what
being
were
with
you
those-
What were you doing with those girls? What were you playing?
Yeah, he's interested in what they were doing.
Yeah.
I think maybe he might ask, which one are you interested in?
Ah.
Right? Or like, which one's your girlfriend? Yeah. And he might want to know what was going on, because he might think, well, what's going on there sexually, right? Or what's happening there? He might say that. And so let me ask you this: if the son replies, "Oh no, Dad, I'm not interested in any of them, or none of them are my girlfriend," what might be Dad's next thought or question? Maybe he won't say it. What might be his next thought?
Would he worry about his son's sexuality?
He might. He wouldn't say it, but
Right.
he wouldn't say outright. But he might start thinking, "Is he gay?
Yeah.
Are you gay?" You know,
Right.
I don't think most dads would actually overtly ask that question.
Right.
But that's where his head's going to go immediately. Is, why are you with 4 women and none of them
You're attracted to.
you're attracted to?
Wow.
And that's because we've all. And now, if he says, "Oh, Stacey is her
Yeah.
name," conversation over.
Right.
Dad goes off to do his thing.
He feels comforted by that.
Feels comforted. He goes.
Everybody's doing what they're supposed to do.
Goes off to the next thing in the day. But if he doesn't say that, then more questions start to come.
Footnotes that.
Yeah. And that's because we have not been socialized as men to take an interest in the lived experiences of women outside of sexual conquest. And it's time that we start to do that. We start to befriend women just to know what their lives are like. What's going on with you? What's it like to live a day in your shoes, but not have an end game of sleeping with them? A lot of guys in college, we talk about this, we joke about this at trainings with guys in college. You know, you'll go to a women's studies program and there'll be 1 or 2 guys in the program, right? And what do most people think about those? There's usually about two things that most people think about that guy in the program, right? Either he's gay,
Yeah.
or he's trying to
There
find
to pick up women.
there to pick up women,
Right. Smart or gay.
right? It's one of the two, and that this goes back to this lack of interest in the experiences of women.
Right.
And as long as that's there, it's really hard to value the lives of women if we're not even interested in their very experiences.
Wow. Startling. Do not use language that denigrates women and girls. Oh.
Yeah, it's the little subtle things, right? I hear more of that language in my own life, or I can only speak from personal experiences with other men, not even towards women.
Right.
Because oftentimes masculinity is performed in a group with other men.
Right.
So I'll be in the weight room, I'll be doing deadlifts with some guys, and they'll tell me to sack up.
Right.
Or
Don't be a pussy.
Don't be a pussy. And that's happening between, there's no women around.
Right.
So in their minds, they're saying, and in my mind for years, I thought, well, I'm not hurting any women. Nobody's hearing it. That's just between he and I.
Right.
No harm, no foul. But what we're doing is we're participating in the development of language that reinforces the idea that women have less value. It's those little subtle things that we do together. And you can think about it think about a guy, the way he might act with a woman by himself. And she'll say, he's a really sweet guy.
Oh,
he's
yeah.
really nice. He's really caring. And then all of a sudden his friends come around. And she goes, in her mind, who are
Who's
you?
this guy? Yeah.
Who are you? It's because men perform masculinity together. So if we want to start to challenge the denigrative language, we have to start to challenge the way we interact with other men. It's between men that this occurs, and that this grows, and that this perpetuates these messages, these ideas, right? And it's often not in the presence of women, but that then bleeds into those relationships with women,
Right,
and
sure.
in our general interactions with others.
Right. So what could a Jay, perhaps not someone as enlightened as you are, but what could somebody say to that guy in the weight room when his friend says, "Hey, don't be a pussy"?
Yeah, well, what we do as men is we emasculate in order to elevate. So we emasculate, we strip them of their masculinity in the idea that we're going to give them more masculinity, which what we're really saying is we're gonna take away the woman out of them, which is less, and give them more man, which is power. And we do this exchange is constantly occurring in our interactions with each other. And I would say, why would it be so hard to just encourage your male friend to be stronger because you believe in him?
Yeah.
Like, I know you can do this. Pick that effing weight up, right? You
Has
can be a bit aggressive.
nothing to do with male,
yeah.
female. It's
You can
just,
still flex and grunt and do
Sure.
all the things you want to do.
Right.
Encourage each other, believe in one another, instead of this stripping of masculinity in order to somehow create more. It's a silly socialization process that we've created.
yeah.
Right? So I would say just simply encouraging one another.
And so innate.
Yeah.
That's the worry, that it is so innate. Yeah. Develop an interest in the experience of women and girls outside of sexual conquest.
Right, and that's what we've sort of already spoken to. Befriend someone because you're interested in who they are, not because of what they look like. Right? Befriend someone because they're also into sketch photography, or photography the same way you are, outdoor photography. Befriend them for that reason, not with the end game of trying to sleep with them. Because what happens in male socialization, we see this all the time, is that men's lives our worth as men is attached to the number of sexual conquests that we have. And when that becomes a center of our worth, then our socialization and our aims outside of our friendship, our immediate friendship, male friendships, become about sexual conquest, because then we're more of a man, right? And so sort of turning off that idea that our worth is located in our sexual conquests, and recognizing that our worth is natural and inherent and innate because we are human, and also because of the goodness in us. What if we lived in a world where men and boys believed that their worth was innate, and it was there because they were human and because of the good things that they did in this world to create a safer, more respectful world, rather than a world where their worth is about the number of girls that they get.
Right. So esteem from esteemable acts, building self-esteem from doing esteemable acts, changing our idea as a culture of what a masculine esteemable act is.
Right. Yes.
Oh boy, you have your work cut out for you, don't you? Finally, model a healthy, respectful manhood to other men and boys.
Yeah. And that can be tough. Let me tell you. It's not easy. I'm not saying that developing a voice is easy. It's a process. But because we have learned the things we've learned about our identities as men, we've never learned the language to address these things. So when I'm out with a group of guys and somebody uses denigrative language about a woman, and there's not a woman around, and I speak up, I'm threatening my position in that friendship.
In the tribe.
In the tribe. And we all are born humanly to connect. We all want belonging and connection to individuals and to groups. And when we challenge these ideas, we're almost threatening that sense of belonging. But I would say that if you really believe in your heart that that's what's right, and that group is going to ostracize you for doing what you feel is right, they're probably not the kind of people for you anyways.
Yeah.
Right?
So
it can be
there's,
tough.
what comes up for me is this idea of shame, right?
Yeah.
That the being respectful to women, acknowledging women's equality, has now become equal to a shameful thing, and that could potentially get you thrown out of the tribe.
Right.
And that is, on a very primitive level, life-threatening.
Yeah. Yeah. Because now you've lost that sense of community and
Right.
belonging that is so deeply necessary for thriving.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it can be tough, but I think once you develop a little bit of a voice and you recognize there's a way to go about it depending on who you're with, that can be respectful of them as well. And, I've been in situations where I've heard people casually just, use the word bitch. Just very casually, simply use it. And I'll approach them and have a conversation real briefly about, why, what was that, what was the point of that, or like what was your aim? And they'll say, oh, it's just a word, like it's just an
Right.
idea, right? And then I'll slowly but surely and respectfully validate their experience, and then also just offer new ideas. Not tell them that they're being a jerk. I'm not going to confront anybody. I'm going to invite them to a conversation. One of the mistakes that people make when going about this work or trying to make changes is that they confront people about these harmful behaviors. And a call to men does not do that. You don't change people by confronting them. You invite them to a conversation, and then people will change when they are good and ready to do so. And we just have to plant the seeds and believe that it's possible.
You are on a mission, and it is a long overdue and much needed mission, and I cannot thank you enough for sharing so much of your time and knowledge and expertise and experience with us. I know that people are going to want to learn more about A Call to Men.
hope so.
How will they find out about your organization?
Well, I'd like to say this real briefly. I'm not doing anything I shouldn't already be doing. So I don't need accolades, but I appreciate it's very sweet of you. But I just believe I'm doing what's right and human in this world, and I think all people should. So, but I think what we can do to connect with A Call to Men, you can go to acalltomen.org. We have our curriculum that is free to download. It's
Wow.
it's called the Live Respect curriculum. It's 9 weeks. You can use it it's designed for middle school up through high school. It addresses everything from male socialization to the man box to media messages about women to gender roles in our society, discusses sexual harassment, sexual assault, and then ways to start to challenge and change those things. So it's a very well-developed curriculum. You can even be used at the college level. Frankly, it can be used in churches, community organizations, mental health hospitals, you name it. It can be used anywhere. So acalltomen.org is your best spot to find these resources.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today on A Straight Talk with Tracey, and we will see you again next month.